Hi class, welcome to section 2 of our cell chapter. This is going to talk mainly about eukaryotic cell structure. Because prokaryotes don't really have much inside of them to talk about, we're going to cover eukaryotic cells in this section. Our key concept question: what are the functions of the major cell structures? Cell biologists divide the eukaryotic cell into two major parts. There's the nucleus, which you can typically see on a microscope, and then there's the cytoplasm. Pretty much the cytoplasm is everything outside of the nucleus. Please highlight cytoplasm. And you can add to the cytoplasm description, like to the side of the slide, that it's a jelly-like substance. And something that's important is that there are certain things that might be dissolved in the cytoplasm, like glucose and amino acids and waste products. It's also going to help maintain water balance because it's a fluid-like substance. And then I would like you to highlight the term organelles in our third bullet, because eukaryotic cells contain these small little structures called organelles. The suffix on the end, ELLE, means small. Okay, one of the problems that students often have is they confuse the term organelle with the term organ. And a lot of times on the Regents exam, you'll see a question where they want you to put a list of parts in order. And almost every single time we get a group of students that will put organs and organelles like next to each other as far as size, and that's not correct. It's organelles are tiny little structures inside of cells. Cells make up tissues, tissues make up organs, and organs make up organ systems, and then the organism. So you have to remember that organelles are inside of cells. The cell membrane controls what enters and leaves the cell. This is going to be an important structure. Actually, section 3 that we get into will focus mainly on the cell membrane. If you look at the labels that they have on this diagram, they're calling it a lipid bilayer. There's that term lipid coming back from the last chapter. This is an important way that it's made because if you remember how lipids and water don't mix, that's why there's a lipid in the cell membrane, because it'll prevent water from getting in or getting out of the cell when it shouldn't. And we need to have this cell membrane control things that go in and out, because otherwise the cell would die. Things that the cell has to have are things like nutrients and oxygen. And there are certain things that the cell has to get rid of, wastes, carbon dioxide, and the cell membrane is going to control all of that. It's going to take in the things that it needs, and it's going to release the things that it doesn't want anymore. I want you to highlight cell membrane on this slide, and I want you to write an analogy to help you remember the function of the cell membrane, okay? Please don't write that the cell membrane is for support and structure. It sort of is, but its main job is to control what enters and leaves. So in your textbook, they talked about a factory. One of the analogies they used for a cell membrane, I believe they used it as like a guard at the door of the factory. The guard determines who can enter and leave the factory. That's kind of how the cell membrane works. You can think of the cell membrane as a screen on the window. It'll only let certain things in and out. So I want you to write down one of those analogies, or maybe you have a different one that you like, but you need to write down something that will help you remember what it is. Okay, so this is a really neat microscopic image of the inside of a cell, and it's called a cytoskeleton. It's not made of bones or anything like that, but it's the supportive structure that's inside of a cell, and they've used dyes, and they use an electron microscope. to get this kind of an image, but this is an actual cell. This cytoskeleton is going to provide support and give shape to the cells. It does help with cell division. It helps cells move. It's very similar actually to our own skeletons. And if you think of, let's go back to our factory analogy, this would be like the concrete beams and the steel columns and all that supportive structure that goes into the actual building itself. That would be kind of like the cytoskeleton. Okay, so here we're looking at a nucleus, another electron microscope image. They get some very nice detail here. Just so you know, these cells don't have color. Okay, the only organelle that really has color would be a chloroplast because it actually has a green pigment inside of it. A lot of these pictures, they either have dye added to them or the computer can modify things and make it look colored. But this is the nucleus. The main function of the nucleus is that it controls cell functions. It stores genetic information, and it has the directions or instructions to make all the proteins that your cell needs to function. I would like you to make sure you highlight nucleus, and you can add to the side that it controls cell functions. Please do not ever write as an answer that the nucleus is the brain of the cell. That will get marked wrong. Okay, please do not write that. And you can even make a note to yourself and say, do not say brain of cell. That is not a correct analogy. It's not going to be a good answer on a test or the Regents exam. Let's go back to our factory analogy. If you're looking at the whole factory, think about the place in a factory that controls how the whole place runs. That would be kind of like the main office. The main office in the factory will send information out to the factory floor so that work can get done. In a cell, the nucleus sends RNA out to the rest of the cell to get work done. So that's how that analogy works. So if you don't like the factory analogy, come up with something else. Okay, inside of the nucleus is something called the nucleolus. Please make sure when you're writing down either nucleus or nucleolus that you spell them correctly because they are very similar to each other. But this is typically a darker structure inside the nucleus, and it makes ribosomes for the cell. On our last slide, the nucleus has the instructions for making proteins. So the nucleus is one of the organelles that's involved in making proteins. The nucleolus has a sort of indirect relationship to making proteins because it's going to make ribosomes, and the ribosomes are actually the organelle that put together amino acids to make proteins. So they're kind of all working together for that similar function. If you were to try and use the factory analogy again, maybe the nucleolus is like your human resources department. It's going to hire the workers or the ribosomes in a cell, and then those ribosomes can go do the work, or the workers will go do that work. Okay, so ribosomes are directly related to making proteins. That is their main job in the cell. When you look at a picture of a cell, they look like tiny little specks of pepper. And they're either free or attached. Free meaning they're just kind of anywhere in the cytoplasm, or attached, and you'll find them attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. If you think about ribosomes in the factory analogy, these would be your assembly line workers putting whatever equipment together. Please make sure you highlight all of these terms that are highlighted on the slide because these obviously are vocab terms, but you will need to refer back to them and it'll make it easier for you to see. And here's our endoplasmic reticulum. The ER, you can write that next to endoplasmic reticulum. And you know what? On the slide, it only highlighted reticulum. I would like you to highlight endoplasmic reticulum, please. And then add ER next to it, because if it's a mouthful to have to say that all the time. So if you hear me say ER, rough ER, smooth ER, that's what I'm talking about, is the endoplasmic reticulum. Their main job is to help transport things throughout the cell. They kind of look like hallways. So you could even write that to the side. When you're looking at a diagram of a cell, they're going to look like spaghetti, a pile of spaghetti, or hallways in the cell. Some of the endoplasmic reticulum will have ribosomes attached to it, and some will not. Let's go to our analogy in a factory. It could be the conveyor belt in the factory. It helps move things along, and then the ribosomes are assembling things, and then the endoplasmic reticulum moves it along. You could make a different analogy if that would be helpful for you. So here, like I said, there's two types of an ER, and the rough ER looks rough because ribosomes are attached to it. Smooth ER looks smooth because there are no ribosomes attached to it. These two types of ER will help produce slightly different things. I'm not worried about those details for you right now, but obviously the rough ER has a large role in protein production because there's ribosomes attached to it. The smooth ER is going to assemble things like lipids and carbohydrates and more stuff like that. And then we've got these tiny little sac-like structures. They're called vesicles. They're little bubbles that have material inside of them. They're going to help move things around the cell. They'll move little food particles or other liquid particles. So there's just like little transport vehicles. So you could call them, like little UPS trucks maybe to transport things around the cell. The function of the Golgi apparatus. Sometimes, and I want you to add this here, sometimes this is called the Golgi body. They're talking about the same structure, okay? The main job of this is to modify, sort, and package proteins and other materials. It takes it from the endoplasmic reticulum, and then it sends it out either for storage or releases it out of the cell. But this is going to be like the packing center at the factory where it gets it ready for shipment. So it's like on the shipping dock is where the Golgi apparatus would be. Whenever you see it in a diagram, it's going to look kind of like a stack of pancakes on top of each other. It looks very similar to the ER, except that it's just kind of a smaller pile of pancakes, I suppose. So you may want to add some of these little tidbits to the slide because you will need to be able to identify these in a picture in several different ways. Other organelles will have functions. We're going to talk in Chapter 9 about mitochondria a lot. The main job of mitochondria is to provide energy for the cell. The mitochondria will break down food to release energy. Please add that part to this slide, that it will break down food to release energy. And when you see it on a diagram, a lot of times, to me, it looks like a hot dog with ketchup squirted on it. And the squiggles inside of this is just the membrane inside of it that's folded, so there's a lot of surface area inside the mitochondria, so it can produce more energy. The specific food that it breaks down is glucose, by the way, so there's another topic from last chapter that will come back to you. Let's take a look at our factory analogy. Let's think of where the factory can get its energy from. If it's not supplied by the electrical company, maybe it could be like an oil burning furnace in the factory. That could be your analogy. If you want to come up with a different one, by all means, please do. Just make sure you highlight mitochondria on this slide. And one last note, if you're asked the function of the mitochondria, do not tell me that it's the powerhouse of the cell. that will be marked wrong. You need to say that it breaks down food to release energy. Do not say it's a powerhouse, okay? That is not a correct statement. So you may want to write that down so you remember not to use that term. Okay, and this is a picture of a vacuole. Specifically, it's a water vacuole in a plant cell. Animal cells also have vacuoles. They tend to be a little bit smaller, but vacuoles are used for storing food, water, and waste. And usually they're a lot larger, at least the water vacuole is in plants, because that helps give them their turgidity, meaning that they can they stand upright basically. And if you don't water your plant for a while, it gets kind of sad and limp, and that's because there's not as much water inside of these water vacuoles. Maybe an analogy in a factory for vacuoles could be an inventory room where you store stuff. Could be the garbage dumpster, you know. A couple different things could serve as our vacuole in the factory. Make sure you highlight vacuole. And these guys are lysosomes. They will have enzymes inside of them that help digest things and break things down. They are small, like little vesicles, but like the difference is that they have an enzyme inside of them. One of the important functions of lysosomes is in your immune system. When your white blood cells trap an invader like a bacteria, the lysosome will come over and connect to the little vesicle where that bacteria is trapped. It'll release the enzyme and it basically digests that bacteria and kills it. So it's an important little structure to help you stay healthy. For our factory analogy, maybe this could be a cleanup crew. You know, after hours, the place needs to get cleaned, so that would be your lysosomes. Okay, centrioles. Centrioles have several different functions. They are these little tiny tubes found near the nucleus. They come in pairs. You add that to the slide, that they always come in pairs. One of the main functions, and we'll talk about it in chapter 10 a lot, is that they help to divide DNA. When cells go through cell division, they need help pulling all the DNA away from each other, all the copies apart. And centrioles are going to help do that. They also help form cilia and flagella. So in the left-hand diagram, that's a picture of like a bacterial cell, but all different types of cells can have cilia and flagella. You can see the flagellum is the long tail looking thing. You could even write that on the slide so you remember what a flagellum is, or a flagella. And then where it's labeled at the bottom, pili, P-I-L-I, that's the other name for cilia. So you could draw a line from cilia to pili so you know that's the same thing. But these centrioles are going to help make up those structures. Another thing you must absolutely add to the slide, and you need to put a star next to it, is that centrioles are only found in animal cells when it comes to the whole cell division part of their function. So put a big star only in animal cells. Plants have a different area that helps divide DNA. It's done a little bit differently. So make sure you remember that difference. Make sure you highlight centrioles on this slide. And just as a side note, when you're looking at a diagram and you're trying to figure out the centriole, a lot of times they look like little licorice bites. So you could add that as your way to remember what they look like in a diagram. Okay, so here is one of the other differences between plant and animal cells. Plant cells will have a cell wall and chloroplasts. This diagram is pointing to the cell wall. In this diagram, you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cells. You don't see the entire cell, but there are 6 cells here. The cell wall is what separates one cell from the other. Plant cells will then have a cell membrane that's right on the inside of the cell wall. It's so close to it that you cannot tell where the cell wall is and the cell membrane is. we're actually going to do an experiment that will move the cell membrane away from the cell wall, so you'll actually be able to see the outline of it, which is kind of cool. Let's see, the cell wall has pores in it so that the cells can communicate with each other and pass things between them. If you think back to section 1 and that picture of cork cells, what you could see there is the cell wall that got left behind. Lots of times the cells in plants look rectangular and just kind of gives nice support and structure to the cells of plants. That's what makes them able to grow as tall as trees do, is this nice firm rigid support that the cell wall has. Let's do our analogy again for factory. Maybe this could be the cement block, or in the foundation or in the walls of the actual building of the factory. Chloroplast is the other structure that plants have that animals do not. Chloroplasts tend to be green because they contain chlorophyll, which is a pigment that helps during photosynthesis. So I would like you to write down the word green on your slide. I would like you to write down chlorophyll is the pigment inside of them. You can write down photosynthesis on this slide because that's what it's involved in. And you can write again that it's only in plants, just to help you remember that. And let's see, if you're looking at a diagram, chloroplasts, they kind of look like they're kind of bean-shaped. They'll usually be green if it's a color image, and they look like they have tiny little stacks of coins inside of them. I don't know how else to describe it to you. I mean, the image that you see in the center of your screen is a microscope image, and you can see kind of all the lined structures in there. Those are the stacks that I'm talking about. And then the diagram at the bottom is more of a cartoon version. Oh, and our analogy for the factory. There could be your solar panels in the factory collecting the sun's energy. This is a diagram of an animal cell, and it's just showing you the different structures that we just went through. You can see there's the lysosome with the digestive enzymes, rough and smooth ER. There's our stack of pancakes, the Golgi, mitochondrion, the centrioles that look like little licorice bites, cilia and flagella.
These are some of the parts of an animal cell. The cell membrane helps control what enters and leaves the cell. The nucleus controls most of the cell's activities. A vacuole stores food, water, minerals, and wastes. Cytoplasm is a gelatin-like substance that contains many chemicals that the cell needs. A mitochondrion converts food energy into a form that the cell can use. Chromosomes are in the nucleus. They contain DNA, a chemical that determines which traits an organism will have. These are some of the organelles found in plant cells. A vacuole stores food, water, minerals, and wastes. A chloroplast captures light energy that is used to make food from carbon dioxide and water. Cytoplasm is a gelatin-like substance that contains many chemicals that the cell needs. The cell membrane helps control what enters and leaves the cell. The cell wall provides support and protection. Chromosomes are in the nucleus. They contain DNA, a chemical that determines which traits an organism will have. The nucleus controls most of the cell's activities. A mitochondrion converts food energy into a form that the cell can use.